drink into it. Yep, that's
Welcome back, and this is Way to Go with brown sugar, spice, and Eric in the middle. So today we're going to continue some of our conversation about things that are going on around the world. And I'd like to open it up to my cohorts here who are going to talk about some elections possibly and some of the things that are going on. For myself, it was interesting to see the results that happened in Italy and in other countries as far as their elections went.
Well, I would like to talk a little bit about the border. We are pretty much going to be closing on that subject today as to why they come. And I just want to give you a little bit of information as to what has happened since we were last here with you folks. A total of 267,000 unaccompanied children have come into this country since Joe Biden took office. This, of course, is costing millions and millions and millions of dollars in resources, in attorneys. You name it, it's costing taxpayers a lot of money. Another thing that is actually pretty much out of control is the amount of money that is being spent in busing a lot of these migrants out of Texas. El Paso, for instance, they just approved an extra $2 million just to bus people out of town. This is only in El Paso. This is not Del Rio or any of the other areas. Where are these people going to? They're mainly being sent to sanctuary cities that claim that they want to pretty much take whoever wants to come in to their place, be welcoming. The Bronx. What's happening in the Bronx is truly amazing. New York City, as most of you know, is the richest city in the world. And the richest city in the world can house these people. We're talking about 13,000 migrants from Texas this year into the New York area. So the Bronx is now actually building a tent city for these people. So things are going from bad to worse. Since July, we've had 20,000 Venezuelans come in. Just since July.
And many of these people, I shared these in the links from last week, but many of these people are sleeping on the streets in places like San Antonio. And it's just because even with the facilities they have, there's not enough. So they're turning people away, and these people have to resort to sleeping on the streets. And if they're lucky, they have a tent, but some of them don't even seem to have that.
And something that is really kind of mind-boggling, at least to me it is, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but our vice president is going to be visiting the Korean border. As you know, there's a lot of turmoil going on right now between North Korea and South Korea. And her visit to our southern border was very, very brief. She actually didn't go out to see what was going on.
Some might even say she didn't actually visit the border at all. She just visited El Paso.
Exactly. So to me, it's just one of those things that make you go, huh?
How could we put a priority on what's going on between North and South Korea when our border is a shambles? And here's another interesting point for you as far as the Bronx story goes. We're talking about a state and a city that has defunded police. So now we're going to accept these people into a tent city, and we can't secure their safety. We can't secure Americans' safety. So again, it boggles the mind that we're heading down this path.
It's bad enough that we're already dealing with a homegrown crime, and on top of that, you put all the rest of the crime that we're pretty much being exposed to. Fentanyl has seen record numbers of deaths. Um, Here over the weekend alone, I think it was on Sunday, here in Las Vegas, police responded to 6 overdoses of fentanyl in one day. So this is truly alarming what's going on, and the fact that the people in charge are not paying attention
Nope.
to what's going on in the southern border. I was listening to an actual border patrol this morning, and one of the things he was talking about was Mayorkas. How Mayorkas really has no authority, even though he's over that department, the Department of Homeland Security. He feels that if Mayorkas did have some type of authority, maybe things would be a little bit different, but he's basically subjected to whatever it is that the administration wants to do.
Yeah.
Kinda like a paper tiger, huh?
Well,
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, he's a fall guy, allegedly, according to this Border Patrol. But who knows? I mean, he might just be part of the problem himself. The Border Patrol
be.
guy might just be trying to respect the chain of command, as is commendable.
hmm
But ultimately, it's just we've got a administration that is incompetent. But even if they weren't, remember, they didn't care when Texas and Arizona were being overrun. And to be totally honest, apart from some harsh words from Muriel Bowser, they didn't even really care when Washington, D.C. and New York City started getting overwhelmed. And right now, I mean, the first time they actually paid attention to this,
hmm
in any sense of the word, in any sense on a national level, was when 50, count them, 50 people were sent to Martha's Vineyard, and 75 people were sent and dumped right in front of Kamala Harris's home. The latter probably wouldn't have even had much attention, though, to be totally honest, had it not been for the former.
Exactly.
This literally was not a problem in anybody's mind until the richest and most powerful people in this country had a burr
In their backyard.
in their backyard, yeah, under their seat, I'd
I
say.
mean, you have to smile a little bit and maybe even laugh a little bit that basically whatever happens in our country is only important if it happens to the elite, the progressive elite for that matter.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I want to call attention again, and I would like for our viewers to write this number down. This is fairus.com.org. I apologize. These are the illegal border crossings to date thus far. By the time that this podcast is over, you will have seen that number change.
And this is by about, what time is it exactly? 6:12 p.m. Pacific time.
Yeah. So we're averaging between 5,000 to 6,000 entries per day.
Yeah, and it's just, even if you're one of those people who, in theory, likes the idea of open borders, this is just too much. It's a sign of problems, not just on our side of the border, but beyond the border as well, too. And we've already discussed that at some length, but so I'm not going to repeat that here. But the problem is people don't want to admit that this is a problem, but this isn't opinion anymore. This is an objective crisis on several counts.
Even a representative, Democratic representative out of Texas, Henry Cuellar, this morning just said that Texas is basically overwhelmed. And, and this is coming from a Democrat. He said that at this point, not only did he believe that the staying in Mexico was the right thing to do, he actually feels that the vast majority of the people that are coming across the border illegally should be deported. I
Wow.
mean, yeah,
That's a big change.
that's
Again.
exactly what I said. I said, wow, I cannot believe that I'm hearing this.
He must be hearing it from his constituents
Exactly.
because
Well, he's up for re-election.
that's
And
probably good.
and I'm sure that yes, his constituents must be like, wow,
Because
what's happening
a
here?
lot of people come here and they come here legally and they go through the process, and it's about a 10-year process on average. But now we're talking about, with these numbers, 5 to 6,000 per day, we're talking about reaching 2 million probably in 1 year. In 1 year, 2 million people. That's like half a percentage point of the population of the United States. That's incredible. I don't know what state, I don't know what piece of government with the taxation level that we've got could support or give any kind of food, shelter, housing, jobs, train them as far as teaching them to live in the United States. I don't know how we could accomplish this.
No, especially due to the way that these entries are being conducted, with really no rhyme or reason. There's not a true order to the way that things are happening to these migrants. So they're here for months and even a year without an employment authorization.
Yeah, which is
You know.
crazy.
I mean, what exactly are we teaching them to do?
Well, what are we exposing them to? Because if they can't work here, how are they supposed to be able to eat, find shelter, find family, or help anybody understand, or even hire an attorney to be able to tell them what it is that they need to do? It's crazy.
Well, and I mean, a lot of people on the right might actually not want them to necessarily find jobs. There's obviously concerns and anxieties about people taking their jobs, but at the same time, I would also encourage people like that to think of of two problems that you would prefer. Would you prefer people who are basically dependent on your tax dollars and cannot work, or people who can legally work for minimum wage? We're not talking about working under the table, because that's really the other alternative.
See, that's the other alternative that I think that people that are even anti this influx of people need to realize, that when we don't give people work permits, they're going to work under the table, which means illegally, which means they're not going to be paying income tax, which means
not even Social Security.
No.
But yet they're still going to be drawing a $350 check
possibly
from taxpayers, on top of food stamps and Medicaid.
And they're going to be partnering with criminal regimes, people that traffic drugs, people who hire them that may be under, let's just say that they may have close ties to human sex and drug trafficking, because those are the people that are going to be around them.
Well, not just cartels either, too. And we have been showing a lot of sympathy to the Venezuelan population, but at the same time, and by the way, good Venezuelans are the first people to shout about this. Something is happening in Venezuela right now. Essentially,
Yes.
What happened is the Maduro regime opened all the prisons and has been encouraging and essentially waving them on, encouraging them to go north into the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that we saw, I mean, this is at a scale that we probably haven't seen since the Mario boat lift.
Yeah, because, well, this is something that he learned from his grandfather Fidel. You know,
Yeah,
back in 1980, that's exactly what Fidel did. Not only did he empty out his prison population, now mind you, not the political prisoners.
Right.
No. We're talking about criminals.
Exactly.
We're talking about thieves.
He
We're talking about
basically
rapists.
he basically emptied out the prisons.
Yeah.
He also emptied out pretty much all of the nut houses, and that's what the United States ended up with,
Receiving.
which is it was very sad. It was actually even very sad for the Cuban community that was already living here.
Yeah.
You know, which basically had a reputation of being very productive, very hardworking. I mean, it was considered one of the best exile communities up until that point. So it was something very difficult for us to deal
Yes.
with.
It's a form of ideological warfare. And the thing is, a lot of these Venezuelans are, in my personal opinion, no different. And I got to commend Jose Colina of Vepex, who about 2 weeks ago, made a proclamation saying, if you see delinquent Venezuelans, make sure to report them to the police. They are doing harm to our community. And you know what? Right on with you. And he's been talking about this continuously too. But the problem is, unlike the Cubans, who we already know have a special status, they've had a special status since almost the beginning.
Right.
The Venezuelans don't really have that. And a lot of people in America, and shamefully, not enough people from the right seem to understand and respect the absolute crisis that Venezuela is in at this time.
Well, I mean, you know, that all boils down to the fact that there are many people that do not understand or see the need for immigration reform, but we need it desperately.
Yeah.
Because asylum is not something that everybody qualifies for. And if there are people that should definitely fall under being able to apply for it, is the people that are fleeing communism.
Yeah.
You know, they're running away from political persecution. They're running away from extremes, from extreme repression, extreme hunger. Just basically, they're living in countries that are totally dysfunctional.
Yeah, we're not talking about people who are just fleeing from cartel-ridden territory, possibly people who work with law enforcement and are being hunted by the cartels, but not everyone who crosses really applies for asylum, but most of these Venezuelans, not the criminals, of course, but most of these Venezuelans really should.
Well, and there's something else that we need to actually look at. Did Cuba and Venezuela, prior to being taken over by these extreme communist regimes, repressive regimes that basically brought misery and hunger into these countries, did they really have this huge population of evildoers and prisoners? Probably not. These types of regimes drive people to do things
Desperation.
that they normally wouldn't even do.
Right.
So even within the common prisoner population, you don't necessarily have people that are really that bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do need to understand that there are going to be some people like, Jean Valjean from Les Miserables who only stole a loaf of bread. But at the same time, we also need to understand there are some people who, even if times were good, would be criminals as well, too. So I think it's important to make that distinction when we talk about people coming across from Venezuela. But at the same time, too, there's no question about it. There are people, the Maduro regime is making sure that troublemakers are crossing into the United States.
And they have a dual reason for that.
No, and then that also takes us back to another point, which is vetting.
Oh, there is no vetting.
The United States does not properly vet the people that are coming across the border. They only pick up on those that are on the terrorist, watch list or what have you, but not, how many of these people that are coming in from Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua that could have maybe had killed someone. How many of those are just falling through the cracks?
At these numbers, we're already to 5,026. At these numbers, I don't know how any country could vet anybody.
You can't.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this assumption that identity is a very easy thing to determine, and background checks are always very easy to determine when there's a lot of data. In the United States, even if the government isn't tracking you, you have TransUnion, you have Experian, you have Equifax, all of whom have very good profiles on you. I guarantee you all three of those companies have more information on you than
care to know.
than almost any federal or state entity has. on you, and that's a topic for another discussion. But the point is, when you have data, when you have good data, this stuff it becomes very, very easy. But when you deal with different countries with different systems, some countries haven't digitalized them. Even if they have digitalized them, they're not necessarily easy for the United States to access, especially if it's a hostile regime like Venezuela.
Mhm.
Exactly. So if it's a hostile regime, Eric, one of the biggest problems we have is how do you access a hostile regime and take the information that they give you as if it was fact? Because if you're a political prisoner and they don't want you there, yeah, maybe they give a bad report anyway. Or if you're a criminal and they want you to come in and cause problems for the United States, maybe they wouldn't tell us. So you're talking about something that's completely unreliable.
Well, and having basically an open border, which is what we have, allows all of these regimes to just get
They
rid.
just dump everything.
They just get rid of everything that they don't want. So financially, they are freeing themselves of a huge burden, which they are dumping on the American people.
A huge burden that they mostly created.
Oh, absolutely.
So here we go again. We're being a
Absolutely.
safety valve, kind of like taking in all comers, and that's what happens.
Speaking of getting rid of things that are inconvenient for regimes, something happened this Sunday on the island of Cuba. Basically, there was an election to vote for whether or not to amend the Cuban Family Code to allow same-sex marriage, adoption for same-sex couples, and this is my favorite part: assisted reproduction for same-sex couples. Now, mind you, this is a country that up to this point is having 12-hour blackouts. I think one time I heard
Even up to 18.
Yeah, 18. I think I heard of a 36-hour blackout, although that might have been Venezuela. Wires are crossing at this point. But the point is, we're talking about 12+ hour blackouts and not enough food and not enough medicine for people. And the blackouts obviously only exacerbate this. And yet, this is the priority that the regime has made up to this point.
It's a fool's errand because you're talking about people who can't even control things like dengue fever. So when people don't have power to ICUs, they don't have medications to treat all these people. And we're going to go and start doing elective procedures and elective in vitro and all these majorly expensive and not something that should be the priority of a country that's having problems with feeding its own people. A country that can't grow its own crops to the point that 70% at least of the food that it has is
country
imported.
Which peso is worth nothing.
Yeah.
The Cuban money, the monetary system inside of Cuba is worth nothing.
And even the face value, which you would not believe, but even the face value has had, now for all the talk we've had about US inflation, Colombian inflation, or Argentinian inflation, everybody talks about Argentina's peso as if it's the one that's suffering the most inflation. But you know what the largest rate of inflation is right now in Latin America? Cuba.
Not hard to understand, though.
And of course, this is, and if you speak Spanish and you watch even a little bit of Manuel Milanesa's videos, you'd understand that the face value of the Cuban peso isn't really even the actual value of the Cuban peso. I mean, the actual value is absolutely worthless. That's another conversation for another time. But to sort of circle back to the election thing, why do you two think that they focused on this instead of that?
Well, possibly because they want to look very progressive to the whole world. Perhaps they're trying to open up channels to places that they don't have any funding from. I can't see why this would be a
they want to appear as if though they're actually moving towards democracy, which is nothing more than a farce. Just to throw some numbers out there. 74.01% of the population went to vote. Okay. 26% did not vote. That means that 26% of the population basically did not want to legitimize this election.
And that's that we know of course, too.
Exactly.
Yes.
Although I'll tell you what, those 26% are my favorite people on the island of Cuba right now.
Because they know what the real priorities are.
And we'll talk a little bit more about what we actually know about Cuban elections in a bit. But yeah.
And then you have 49.6% that voted no and 46.6% that voted yes. And in reality, they turned around and basically presented this as a win for this referendum. It is in fact not a win.
No.
But this is the way that the Cuban government functions.
Backwards.
It's all a farce.
Yeah, and I did a little bit of research, and even these sources these are sources that were even referenced in Wikipedia. If you trust such things, I don't trust them much, but at the same time, they did point to some interesting articles. Now, I looked at some journal studies, which I didn't purchase the whole study, but the abstracts basically point out that due to an analysis of National Assembly elections in 2013, see, the way it works in Cuba, at least in theory, is that, and we're talking about a somewhat different election than this referendum we're here. National Assembly, which is in theory Cuba's equivalent of Congress, has in theory, they run for 5-year terms, and so once every 5 years, the candidates are put on the ballots, but there is only one candidate for any given National Assembly position,
which is normally the same candidate. So why vote? Yeah,
so why vote? Now, the opinions of some of these journal studies, and this is a very political science angle, mind you. They try to be as neutral. Honestly, I think they're being so neutral, they're being stupid. But that's just my opinion. And I've studied something similar to this happens in China, I might add too. People can choose to abstain from voting, or fill in one candidate and not fill in another candidate. But apart from getting a general temperature gauge of how the population is responding from the candidates, it doesn't really do anything. Every single time, every single candidate that's selected from basically a commission that is chosen by the actual Communist Party of Cuba, those are the only people who ever appear on the ballots, and those are the only people who ever get elected. And this is very similar to what happens in China, by the way. That China's National People's Congress, by every single reputable, at least, news source, it's called a rubber stamp parliament.
Right.
And that's essentially what the National Assembly is in Cuba.
Yeah, there's never any opposition whatsoever. And not just that, there's also no monitoring of this so-called election.
Yeah.
I mean, who was there to really observe what they did?
You mean they didn't have blue thumbs and all that kind of stuff?
None of that. They did use paper ballots.
Wow.
Yeah,
but on the paper ballot, let's say you have a paper ballot, but if you only have one candidate to choose from, how can that be anything? Yeah. Is that an election?
But even for this referendum, they used the paper ballots. But again, no one to oversee what was really going on there.
But wait a second, Maria. There was a guy, and I actually had the pleasure of sitting in at this panel. There was a guy at Freedom Fest. Freedom Fest is an annual conference that's held every year. This year it was held in Las Vegas in July. And I had the pleasure or displeasure of sitting next to 2 seats away from a guy who has a YouTube channel called the Convo Couch. And I've actually included his video in the sources as well if you want to listen to his claims and you want to listen to the responses. There was a panel called Cuba Libre, and on this panel were Jorge Galicia, my friend, Marta Bueno, who I've mentioned on this podcast before, Daniel DiMartino, who is an associate with Jorge Galicia, does the Dissident Project, which is an organization that educates youth on communism and socialism. I would definitely recommend checking out dissidentproject.org, and moderated by my other friend, Ana Riso. And so this man, he came in and he claimed that the election standards in Cuba were so much more secure than the ones in our country at this point.
I don't see how he could do that. I mean, apart from the fact that they are written ballots, which is a move in the right direction, so they're actually physical ballots. But if you don't have two opposing views or even three candidates for one office, and if you don't have a populace that feels that they have the freedom to speak against the government, then elections are a big farce.
Right. They always win.
Yeah, I mean, the elections are a farce.
They're just like,
They
oh
always
yeah,
win.
more of the same, more of the same.
To be fair, the elections are more secure in one aspect and only in one aspect. It does ensure that whoever the party wants to win
Is gonna win.
gets to win.
That's
So
what I'm saying. They win or
That's
they
secure,
win.
I guess.
So when you look at this referendum here, it's tempting to look at this with a naive point of view and thinking that this is a step in the right direction. And there are some other people in this country who believe that Cuba has a much more fair electoral process on account of the idea that you can, at least in theory, amend the Constitution by referendum, which, that's not something we can do on a national level, but many states can do that. So I don't know why Cuba, assuming that they're being honest about this, which I'm absolutely certain they're not.
Well, geez, it's like a referendum. That's like a ballot question where the only answer is yes.
Well, do you know of any cases where they've actually voted on the Constitution lately? Because I couldn't find any anywhere.
This whole thing is a sham. It's a big sham. This is a country that for many, many, many years, throughout most of its history, has really pretty much thought about gay people as third-class citizens, not even second-class citizens. This is a country that had special concentration camps for gay people, So, I mean, is this like some type of redemption? I mean, what really is it?
I don't. Did it really change anything? That's the next question. And will we ever know whether it actually changes anything?
Well, I honestly believe that this election was probably held because people know that there are foreign investors who are considering investment in Cuba. Cuba is trying to open up.
That's all I can
at this
think of.
point.
Cuba is trying to open up to the United States with the help of the current administration. That is what this whole situation is about. They are trying to give not just the world, but predominantly the American people an image, which is totally a farce, of the slightest smitten of democracy. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, and it's actually quite concerning, at least to me it is, to think that Americans would actually fall for this. Everybody sees a country that is basically devastated, that doesn't have anything. So sure, there's plenty of opportunity to bring in new business and bring in new markets because it's devastated. But how safe are you in a country where there's no rule of law?
Well,
Yep.
see, that's something that's really.
I
serious.
mean, they basically, you could be doing wonderful. You could have a manufacturing plant, and you could end up making $20 million. Guess what, Annette? They can turn around from out of the blue and accuse you of corruption.
Right.
They take your factory, they keep your $20 million, they take you to court, they take you to jail, they give you a 20-year sentence, and then they turn around and they tell your family that if they want you back, that all they have to do is give them another 10 million for you on top of the 20 million they already kept.
Yeah, I would encourage anyone who has doubts on this to look at freedomhouse.org. Their current score for Cuba right now, and this is the source I use to get information on the electoral process, such as it is in Cuba, by the way. So that's another reason to look up on it. But their current score for Cuba is 12 out of 100. 12.
So they're not even in the failing. They're so low that they can't even get an F.
So,
just imagine.
So this is in regards to what, Eric?
This
for
is
clarification.
This is in regards to in general, everything. In terms of political rights, they score a 1 out of 40. Civil liberties, 11 out of 60. Now, in order to read about the electoral process in the links that we've included here, like I said, their process is that, in theory, people elect their Congress members, their National Assembly Congress people. But in reality, they're only given one choice. And so the most they can do is their choices are not to say no to this guy. Their choices are to say, I really like this candidate, or I'm not wild about this candidate, but whatever you say, Communist Party of Cuba.
Exactly.
And like I said, and it's a very political science type of interpretation. All this really does is it's a way to gauge the temperature of the people and to propagate to naive outsiders that there's something resembling a democratic process. But I cannot stress enough, this is indistinguishable from what happened in the Soviet Union. This is indistinguishable from what happens in China today at this time. I mean, China, I have heard anecdotal accounts of some people in small villages being able to actually choose their party representatives. But apart from small isolated cases like that, there is no such thing as democracy there. Cuba is in the same category of countries like China, except they're even worse. 12 out of 100. Probably only North Korea, maybe Turkmenistan and maybe Turkmenistan and Iran, as far as countries that are ruled by dictatorships go, score even worse than that.
I wouldn't call this an election. I wouldn't call this like a referendum from the people.
No,
Hell, they didn't
I
even
think
get
we need to
choose.
call it what it is. We need to
A
call it
farce.
A propagandic
a
farce.
show. It's a
Yeah.
show.
It's a
it's
show.
farce.
Yes, it's a show. And it's a show predominantly for Americans to give just this image of, yes, we're changing, we're going in the right direction. No, they're not. They're extremely needy. They need those American dollars. They are buying dollars left and right. So
that's why the face dollar of the Cuban peso is much higher than its actual value too. Well, one reason at the very least. It's a way to
It's
fleece
propped
their
up.
citizens
exactly.
out of remittances.
The situation for the Cuban people gets worse and worse. Now, on top of everything, they got hit with this Hurricane Ian that just went through Pinar del Rio and has left devastation, houses with no roofs, floods. My heart goes out to these people.
Yeah, I saw a video earlier today of people standing in their house with water up to their waists, pretty much.
And you know what the saddest thing about this is? We can't help them. We can't help them. We can turn around right now as a foundation. We can turn around right now and we could gather up food and medicine and whatever resources we want to gather up. It never reaches the people.
That's part of the problem.
The government keeps it all, turns around and sells it to whoever they want.
Exactly.
And so, Cubans have it bad inside and out, because those are people that we care about and we can't help them, unfortunately.
And when people protested the government in Cuba, we turned around and said it was something about medicines and food. And of course, that might have been what triggered it, but that's not what they were protesting for. They were protesting for actual governmental change.
Yeah, they wanted freedom. Freedom is the only thing that can actually provide a sense of well-being to a human being.
And anything less than a show of support for the Cuban people, not, loosening up restrictions for the dictatorship, but actual support for the people and their fight for freedom, is, in my mind, just feckless and pusillanimous.
Exactly. And, now that we're talking about hurricanes, I briefly want to touch the situation in Puerto Rico, because that's also a very sad situation and a very good example about government failure to its people.
Granted, not as bad as Cuba, but...
Yeah, it's not a communist nation, but still the corruption has been so immense. They haven't figured out yet how to fix their electric grid. I mean, this is very sad that Puerto Rico has to be without electricity, for crying out loud. You know, the biggest difference here, of course, is that we can send resources, we can send food, we can send money, we can send whatever we want to Puerto Rico, and it can get there and it can be distributed. But it's still a very, very sad situation for the Puerto Rican people, and our hearts go out to them.
Yeah, indeed.
Mhm.
And I mean, I will say Anna Navarro actually tweeted, and this is a woman I cannot stand at all. I mean, I don't particularly like any of the people on The View, but Anna Navarro is definitely pretty close to the top of the list of people I don't like on The View. But even she said, we're focusing all this stuff on the Queen of England at this time. Why aren't we paying any attention in the media, even just in passing, to Puerto Rico? And I
Very true.
can't help but think, she's got a point on this.
Mhm.
She does have a point, but when you're deep into being a propaganda machine and not a machine that's trying to put out the truth so that we find solutions, this is what you're going to have. You're going to have people perseverating on things that are convenient to ignore the obvious.
Yeah.
Eric, and speaking about the Queen, I want to touch briefly on changes in Europe. In England, on September 6th, they have a new prime minister, Liz Truss. Basically, she was appointed by the Queen. The Queen actually got an opportunity to meet her and appoint her just prior to her death on the 8th.
Which means she was probably sick and not feeling very well. So you know what? I mean, nothing but praise for the Queen. She really took her job seriously.
Absolutely. That was very gracious of her to have met with Liz Truss to welcome her as the Prime Minister. Liz Truss is a member of the British Right, and a lot of people are, of course, up in arms about that.
Well, I mean, she's no Boris Johnson. She's not the celebrity turned feckless politician that Boris Johnson was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether Liz Truss will be better or worse than him, but I didn't know anything about her, whereas Boris Johnson's been in the media for at least the past decade.
Well, she's going in with a good economic plan for England, so we wish her the very best. Another country in Europe where there's been big change is in Italy. Italy just elected their very first female prime minister. And her name is Giorgia Meloni. She is the leader of the Brothers of Italy party. A lot of those people in the media, especially the leftist media, is putting her out to be this extreme far left fascist prime minister, when in all actuality, the only thing that this woman has come out and said very openly is that she puts God, family, and country first.
Wow, those are pretty radical beliefs there.
Yeah, she just sounds like a conservative. Now, to be fair, the claims come from the fact that not even the party that whose members formed the Brothers of Italy, but the party before that, not even that party, the party originally from that, had its origins as a fascist party, but as early as the 1970s, they started moving away in that direction. And then the other party,
You mean away from that direction?
oh, sorry, away from fascism.
Mm-hmm.
At least if you believe the sources. But with the formation of the second party, and they did take the original logo. From what I've read, it seems like the intent was to make sure that other parties couldn't use the original logo as a way to take ownership. But this was in the 1980s, if my research serves. They were pretty committed to moving against fascism, and in 1995, the leader of their party outright rejected fascism. So this is a party that has gone through a political movement that's gone through a lot of changes, not too different from the PRI in Mexico, except unlike the PRI, it seems like this party's moved in a good direction, at least in my personal opinion.
Well, that certainly applies. The interesting parts about this is you remember that Italy was hit so hard with the COVID, and part of what some people don't know about is their partnership at the time with having a huge influx of Chinese tourists. So I think that their exposure rate was also very high at the time. So for the Italian people to choose someone of this caliber, of this party, shows that there has been a rejection of what was going on in Italy at the time. And that's, I think that's the most important part of what we're seeing, is we're starting to see that even in Europe, these policies that allowed this massive influx of people or huge socialist, communist type of ideology to flourish, they're being rejected by the people.
Well, this also happened in Sweden recently, and a large part of that is because a lot of people there have thought that Sweden's going in the wrong direction, and that the way they've been treating migrants, heck, even the migrants are saying that the way that Sweden is treating migrants is wrong. And, I don't think it's news to anyone who's paid attention that Europe has been going through a parallel
Yes.
crisis. And, again, it's a situation where a lot of good people and a lot of people who have good asylum claims come in, but at the same time, a lot of criminals or even just opportunists are coming in as well, too, from the Middle East and North Africa. And like with the United States, I mean, they have to figure out a way to bring in the good and weed out the bad. And they've just been having a tough time. And, I guess the people finally have realized that their governments are not up to the task.
So they're rejecting the governments that were in power and placing other people in power. So
And I think both of these women basically want new economic opportunities for their country as well. Let me also point out to the fact that Biden has no ambassador to Italy.
Ooh.
In the midst of this whole situation.
That's amazing. How
That's a
could
big
we not
goof.
have an ambassador to Italy?
So,
Did
but
he forget?
but in any case, we wish both of those women the very, very best. I want to point back to our counter up here. We are now at 5,156 illegal border crossings today. We will most certainly reach 6,000 before the day is over.
So again, I mean, just so we understand the numbers, we're talking about close to 2 million people in a year. That's incredible
Yeah,
to me.
it'll be 2 million people.
That's
In a
basically
year.
that's
In a year.
in a year. It'll be 4 million people since Biden.
that's
took
about
office.
2/3% of the United States population on paper, at least.
Exactly. Exactly.
And with those numbers, again, we can't stress the ability of these people to function in our society, to be able to communicate. Even on a medical level, could you imagine they have a crisis, a trauma, or anything like that, and they won't even be able to communicate with some of the people. So this becomes fairly dangerous.
It is.
But you know what? We're all going to try in our own way to help solve this problem. And in the meantime, help Cubans who are crossing over, Venezuelans for that matter, if they want to come and approach us. Jose Colina, I reached out to you last week. Feel free to tell people who are in the western part of the United States about us.
Exactly. We thank you so very much for being with us. Another Tuesday. We'll see you again next week, live from Las Vegas, from the Cuban Heritage Foundation headquarters. Thank you.